So Byron Donalds has finally announced his big policy. His big policy? Make Florida New York.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
So, welcome to the podcast. My name is Michael Bradford. Don't forget to subscribe. All right, so Byron Donalds, Republican for governor, is running on one thing now. Making Florida New York. All right, so how is he going to do this? He's going to bring Wall Street to Florida. So, this might sound good, right? On the surface, Wall Street brings in pretty much all of the economy for New York, and there's plenty of opportunity. This is going to improve everyone's lives, but that's not what happens, specifically in Florida. Why? Because Florida is where people want to move. They already want to move here. So what happens when you bring something like Wall Street here? They're not going to hire people from Florida that are already living here. They're going to hire New Yorkers that already work on Wall Street and just move their office to Miami or move their office to Tampa. So there's not really a great benefit for Floridians in this. So this is Byron Donalds' big policy. Between making Florida New York and bringing AI to Florida. So I don't know about you, but that's not something that I want. The big part I follow that I've kind of held throughout this podcast as I've done it is really focus on keeping Florida. Now, that doesn't mean not to have jobs. That doesn't mean to not bring manufacturing to Florida. But you must encourage people to hire Floridians first, right? What does it benefit Florida to have low taxes, have low regulation, only to be pushed out by millionaires and people with years and years of experience coming in and raising the housing price, right? So the more people that move here, the more the housing prices increase. Now, there will be service level jobs and there will be other kinds of jobs that come with this. However, as we've seen throughout kind of Florida history, is that the more people that move into an area like say Tampa, Miami, Jacksonville, Orlando, even the smaller areas, is that it eventually pushes out the people who have lived there for generations. So how does this benefit Floridians? It doesn't. It benefits people who want to move to Florida, not the people who are already here. Now, I wouldn't expect this from anybody, or I would not expect anything else from Byron Donalds. Why? Because he's from New York. He's from Brooklyn. There's no connection. There's no the roots holding him to the culture, to the history of Florida. Now, you might think to yourself, well, I'm second generation Floridian, or I'm first generation Floridian. Why don't I get a say in Florida's future? You do. That's not what we want is remember why you moved to Florida. Now, you might say, well, because of low regulation. Well, because of low taxes. Well, do you think people moving out of New York to Florida is going to keep it that way? For a time, yeah, you might have some short-term benefits. However, over a long period of time, for maybe your children, maybe until your later age, it's going to change the essence of what it means to be a Floridian. Now, Floridians have been known to adapt. We're used to harsh climates, the heat, the humidity, the gators, the spiders, we're basically the Australia of America. But the idea that we need to make it all city, pave over all the swamps, pave over all the woodlands, all the wildlife corridors that we have here. That is not what we want Florida to be. There has to be a way to make Florida economically viable without changing what it means to be Floridian. So, how do you do that? Well, you can keep cities within cities, right? Now, we've taken a step back on that by by limiting the height of high rises, where condos can only reach a certain height before they have to be inspected, because of that tower that fell down in Miami a few years ago. Okay, reasonable, but the idea is now you just have more urban sprawl, right? So we're building houses, building houses, building houses, building houses. Now, people need somewhere to live, correct? But 300,000 people moving to Florida every year, that's where the houses are going to. Those are that's why housing prices, even with all of the development that's gone on, that's why housing prices and property prices have yet to fall. Because we are importing people from New York, from California, from overseas, who then take the jobs because they have the experience, right? They don't want now, there's nothing wrong with experience. But what does it, again, benefit Floridians? Okay, you can have a great economy, a great GDP, and still have a problem with pushing out the people who live here. Okay, so all that's going to do is make people flee the state. Eventually, they're going to end up fleeing to another state. Who knows what that will be? And then you'll end up with just another New York, where you import the workers, you import the foreigners, the 30% cities of your city being foreign-born, like New York City. You'll end up with that fundamental change. So this is the key mistake that Republicans are making. They are often focused on GDP increasing, not how do we make the people who live here currently, how do we improve their lives? Now, we're not talking about business owners. We're not talking about corporate interests. We are talking about the people who are here looking for a job now, here, not in New York that want to move to here. Right? Because what purpose does a government serve if it tries to serve people in another place? It doesn't. The government exists to defend, to provide justice in the state of its citizens, not with the federal government overseas, not with the state government to another state. You should want to grow your economy in your state. You should want to outcompete the other places that you have. That's why the federal system is so good in America. However, if you consistently try to outpace, if you consistently try to overextend yourself, overbuild, over-import people, you end up changing the fundamental principles that underlie a society. Now, Florida man, he's crazy, but the idea that Florida has always been that way is kind of something that needs to be held onto. Not methods, not tweakers, not a bunch of homeless. Now, Orange County has a large population of homeless. Excuse me, let me start over. Orange County has a large population of homeless. However, importing more people isn't going to solve that problem. Raising the GDP does not help homeless people, right? It helps most people, but if you're concerned about the homeless, that's not where you need to go. However, you need the prime principle behind what you need to get rid of. Maybe not get rid of the homeless population. That's the wrong word. Maybe to get the homeless off the street would be, obviously you need the shelters. You need the first line items, right? However, they need principle and meaning, right? If you have no connection to society, if you're basically a hermit, which is basically another form of homeless person, so to speak. I mean, there's a large Venn diagram that overlaps, but if they need connection to society, they need a community, they need to be able to find meaning in life, right? Beyond the drugs, beyond the different problems. And just raising the GDP or building more houses and paving over woodlands and all that stuff isn't going to solve that problem, right? So the Republicans have that problem, right? The Democrats are actually making improvements in polls. And I just saw a poll come out this week that has David Jolly beating Byron Donalds in a head-to-head. Way too early to say. Way too early to say this is going to be the guy that overturns Florida for the last 30 years to the Democrats, right? Because let's be honest, there's not many people talking about this. There's not many people talking about the Florida governor's race. They should. Why? Because Florida has been leading the way on almost every primary issue. It could be a purple state, right? If the Republicans aren't careful and tie their horse to Trump, tie their future to the Iran war, then we could fundamentally be looking at a fundamental change here in Florida. Not good. That's not what a majority of Floridians would want, I would think. However, if you import New Yorkers, it's going to become more of a problem. If you bring Wall Street down to Florida, you're going to end up changing what Floridians is. Basically, you're going to take New York policies and implement them in Florida. Maybe not in the next 10 years, maybe not in this lifetime, but you will end up changing what it means to be Floridian. Maybe it needs to change. What do you think? I don't want it to change. I think Floridians, at least the people who have lived here for multiple generations, have a great kind of concept of the mixture between urban life, rural life, and suburban life, right? Obviously, going towards the urbanization. That is probably the main issue that will motivate voters, right? The economy will motivate voters, but if people aren't going to see the benefits of that, you got retirees. They'll vote for that, right? You'll get the boomer vote for sure if you say just the economy, right? The service industries and the people moving here who they're on their way out. Why should they care? But the young voters, the Gen Z and the millennials, they're not going to see improvement in their lives. They're going to see more competition from Gen X, maybe late millennials, but you'll end up having the people move here for those jobs, and you'll end up with a massive problem with basically creating a helot class of sorts. So that's why Byron Donalds is probably a bad choice as of right now. Now, is he better than David Jolly? Probably. He probably is. However, oftentimes we suffer from something called a beta paradox, right? Where in order to take that next step to be the best, to be what you could be, or to make life better for you, you need to make it worse first, right? Because if you're stuck here, you're not going to improve yourself. However, if you were here, you would want to improve to right here, right? So that's the beta paradox of why we kind of get stuck in a rut. Why supermajorities with Republicans, or even supermajorities with Democrats. I'm not going to leave you all out. That's why they end up stopping policies that would possibly, or maybe not improve, but maybe that's the idea that they want. So but because things are okay right now, they need to group in a certain amount of voters. You can't rock the boat too far. And especially because we're in primary season, I would expect this. I would expect a massive run to the right from the Republicans and a massive run to the left for the Democrats. But watch out, because as soon as we get close to the election, you'll start to see moderation, especially after particularly after the primaries. Right? You'll see a run to the left leading up, or a run to the right, and they'll try to run to the middle in order to solidify the vote. And in Florida, you end up with a problem. You end up with corporatist Republicans and Democrats that just seem to be off their rockers, right? I've ticked off a lot of Democrats by minorly critiquing liberals before, And what's funny is I wasn't even critiquing them. I was actually saying they have an end goal. Whereas if you ask a Republican, what is your end goal? What is your ideal what is your ideal state? What is your ideal government look like? You'll probably get 15 different answers. With with Democrats and with liberals and communists and radicals, like I said, you'll get probably a solid answer. You'll probably get a more consistent answer. In fact, there's a thing on, I'll post this on X, so if you want to see it, there's the group of ideas on the left are really small, right? That's the range of ideas, right? They overlap pretty much everywhere. Whereas if you go to the Republican side, you got people scattered all over the place, right? That's because the Republican Party is a coalition. I've said that before, but the Byron Donalds will make Florida into more of New York, and that's not what I believe Floridians want. Now, is Fishback the answer? Who knows? He's probably a little too extreme for most of people. However, in the same poll, I saw that he beat David Jolly by 2 points. That's not saying much this early. I just want to restate that. It's not saying that much early. But what Fishback is doing is he's trying to win the future. He's not trying to win this election. He's trying to win the internet. And by doing so, he's trying to set up the future of the Republican Party, which is a generally good direction. Now, obviously, he has extreme policies or extreme ideas or extreme rhetoric. Right, but he's shifting the Overton window to the right and making Republicans either have to cover or they're making Republicans have to solidify. Right, so that's kind of what Trump did. Now Trump doesn't seem to be solid enough. He seems to be over here. He's anti-war. He's not anti-war. He's bombing Iran. He's overthrowing Venezuela, and then he's like, no wars. Or then he's like, we're going to deport, but not everybody. We're going to deport the criminals, and then we're going to import more H-1B or H-2B. So Trump is a little too wishy-washy. He has the cult following, and that's why he can kind of get away with a lot of stuff that he's gotten away with. Now, all this to say is, who are we going to vote for, Florida? Are we going to vote for, more paving over the wildlife? I hate sounding like that. That sounds like I'm an extreme tree hugger environmentalist, and maybe I've become that. Oh my goodness. That 10 years ago, I never would have thought that. In fact, I still tend to have very libertarian beliefs. However, you can't have open borders. You can't import the entire United States or the entire world to Florida. You can't have a population of 40 million people in Florida. Why? Because the state's not large enough. In fact, most of the states in the U.S. aren't large enough for that. So eventually we're going to have to not import as many people from out of the country, from out of state. You're going to have to decide. There's three things next week I'm going to get into on how we can stop that. I've talked about them before, but I want to reiterate them again. Thank you for joining me for this podcast. Go ahead and like, comment, subscribe. If you like what you heard, tell me why. If you don't like what you heard, I want to know why. I want to know why people would vote for Byron Donalds. I want to know why people would vote for James Fishback. It's very. I think Florida, the next governor of Florida, is going to be an earmark on what happens in 2028 with the next presidential election. How Florida goes will tell us a lot. It looks like it's going left. I don't want it to, but it's up to the Republicans to decide whether they want corporatists or they want actual real conservatorship. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.